We sank down onto the soft sand, our fingers entwined, our bodies pressed close. Every touch, every whisper felt like a promise, an understanding that we were crossing a line we could never uncross. But neither of us hesitated. Welcome, everyone. Today, I want to tell you a story about choices, boundaries, and the consequences of wanting someone you know you shouldn't. We're going to a hidden island resort, a paradise far from the city's watchful eyes, where secrets are well kept and discretion is essential. Do you think it's possible to control your feelings when everything you've built is at risk? Is it ever worth breaking those boundaries? Let me know your thoughts as you listen to Margot's story, and share your perspective in the comments. My name is Margot Grayson, and my life revolves around Allura, an island resort that has become my empire. This place is more than just a business. It's my sanctuary. I built Allura from the ground up, crafting it into a luxury haven for the wealthy, a world where discretion reigns and the outside world seems a distant memory. As the founder, owner, and face of this place, I make the rules here. Guests and employees alike understand that one slip can ruin everything we've worked to create. Allura isn't just a resort, it's a world I control. Then came Leo. Leo Grayson is my husband's son. I remember the day Henry introduced us 5 years ago. Leo was already a grown man, barely out of college, tall and striking with a quiet intensity that made it hard to look away. He was the kind of man who could command a room without even trying, much like his father. When Henry asked me to let Leo join the business, I'll admit I hesitated. But Henry insisted. "He's your family too now, Margot," he'd said. So, reluctantly I agreed, though I told myself it was temporary. I didn't need another Grayson interfering in my domain. But when Leo arrived at Allura, freshly returned from years in Europe, I knew immediately that something was different. He was no longer the young man I'd met at his father's side. He was confident, experienced, and he fit into the island like he belonged here. There was a certain danger in his gaze, a boldness that unnerved me in ways I wasn't prepared for. It was only a matter of time before I felt the walls I'd built around myself begin to tremble. Our first encounter happened during one of Allura's exclusive evening events, a gathering that only the most elite guests are invited to. The night was sultry, with a warm ocean breeze drifting through the open doors of the dining hall, filled with the sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter. I was standing near the entrance greeting guests when I felt his eyes on me. When I turned, there was Leo leaning casually against a pillar, watching me. He looked different, more poised, the shadow of a smirk on his lips, as if he knew something I didn't. He approached, offering me a glass of champagne. Our fingers brushed, and for a moment I forgot where I was. "To your success, Margot," he said softly, his voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite place. "Thank you, Leo," I replied, keeping my voice steady, but inside I was unraveling. There was something unspoken between us, something that felt dangerously close to desire. The evening continued, but his presence lingered in my mind. Each time I glanced in his direction, I found him looking back, his gaze intense and unwavering. By the end of the night, I was sure of one thing. This would be the first of many nights I would remember with Leo. What would you do if you were in Margot's position? She's worked so hard to create her sanctuary, but now Leo has returned, and he's no longer the boy she once knew. Is it possible to resist something so tempting, or is it inevitable to give in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I couldn't ignore it. Days passed, and the memory of that evening lingered, haunting me. Leo was around the resort often, involved in meetings, overseeing projects, making his mark on Allura. I knew I had to maintain professionalism, keep the boundaries firm, but something about his presence, intense, curious, and challenging, drew me in. One evening, I found myself alone in the main lounge. Most of the guests had retreated for the night, and the quiet hum of the ocean filled the air. I was going over the schedules for the next day when Leo appeared, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Margot," he greeted, his tone casual, but there was a fire in his eyes. "Leo," I replied, forcing myself to look calm, though my heart pounded. "What brings you here so late?" He shrugged, sitting down across from me with the ease of someone who belonged. "Couldn't sleep," he said. His eyes locked onto mine. "This place is incredible, but sometimes it feels lonely." I knew what he meant, even if neither of us would admit it. Running Allura required total dedication. leaving little room for personal connections. We sat in silence and I could feel the tension thickening. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering, and spoke softly. "Do you ever get tired of being in control all the time?" It was a question I didn't expect. No one had ever asked me that, and the honesty in his voice disarmed me. I glanced away, but he reached across, his hand brushing against mine. A fleeting electric touch. "I know what people think of me, Leo," I said quietly, not sure why I felt the need to explain myself to him. "They think I'm cold, that all I care about is success. But they don't know what it takes to keep something like this alive." Leo nodded, his expression softening. "I understand more than you think." I met his eyes again, feeling an overwhelming urge to open up, to share a part of myself I usually kept hidden. The walls I'd built began to crumble, and before I could stop myself, I found my hand lingering on his. He didn't move away, and in that moment something shifted. We were no longer stepmother and stepson. We were just two people drawn together by an unspoken understanding. I stood up, breaking the connection, trying to regain my composure. "It's late. We both have responsibilities tomorrow." But as I walked away, I knew that was only the beginning. Our paths crossed again just days later, this time under very different circumstances. Leo had arranged a private dinner for some prospective investors on the west side of the island. As the owner, I felt compelled to join him to support the venture. But as the evening wore on, I noticed he wasn't paying as much attention to the investors as he was to me. When the dinner ended and the guests had left, I headed toward the shore, needing some air. The secluded beach was quiet, lit only by the glow of the moon. I'd barely taken a few steps before I heard him behind me. "Margot." I turned, finding him watching me, his expression unreadable. For a long moment we just stood there, the sound of waves filling the silence. He moved closer, his hand reaching up to gently touch my arm. I felt my resolve weaken. "Why did you come to Allura, Leo?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "To understand it," he replied, his voice just as soft. "To understand you." His words hung in the air between us. He leaned in, and for a moment I didn't move. Then his lips met mine, and all the carefully constructed barriers crumbled. It was soft at first, hesitant, but quickly grew deeper, more passionate. Years of restraint, of unspoken feelings, exploded in that single kiss. When we finally pulled away, breathless, I looked at him, my mind racing with a million thoughts. I knew this was dangerous, that it threatened everything I had built. But in that moment I didn't care. Margot has finally crossed a line she never thought she would. Do you think she should let herself continue down this path with Leo? Or should she end things now to protect her reputation and her business? Let me know what you think. Do you believe forbidden love can ever be worth the risk? After that night, everything felt different. We had crossed a boundary that couldn't be uncrossed, and the tension between us only grew. Leo seemed even bolder now, his glances lingering, his touches more daring. It was thrilling, but it was also dangerous. One evening, I asked him to meet me in my private office, hoping we could discuss things rationally. When he arrived, the look in his eyes told me that this conversation wouldn't go the way I planned. "Leo, we need to talk," I began, my voice firmer than I felt. "This can't continue. It's too risky. If anyone finds out..." "Margot, stop," he interrupted, his voice low but intense. "You feel it too. Don't pretend this is just a mistake." His words hit me hard, and for a moment I was speechless. The truth was, he was right. I did feel it, and it was more than just a fleeting attraction. But I couldn't afford to be reckless. "This isn't just about us, Leo," I replied, struggling to keep my composure. "It's about Allura. It's about everything I've worked for. We have to think about the consequences." Leo looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "I don't care about the consequences, Margot. I want you. Isn't that enough?" For a brief moment I considered giving in, letting go of everything for the chance to be with him. But reality crashed back, reminding me of the stakes. I looked away, my heart heavy. "I can't, Leo. I'm sorry." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving me alone in the silence of my office. After our lingering conversation in my office, I'd convinced myself it was best to keep my distance. Leo's intensity, his gaze that lingered a beat too long, was impossible to ignore. But I was determined to resist, to keep things professional. despite the unmistakable tension simmering between us. Then one evening Leo texted me. He invited me to join him for a quiet walk on the beach, on a side of the island rarely visited. I knew I shouldn't go, but something inside me, an impulse I couldn't control, compelled me to meet him there. Just one evening I told myself one final moment of closure. I arrived to find Leo waiting, the moonlight casting a soft glow across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the quiet determination in his eyes. He was leaning against a rock, watching the waves crash against the shore, but he turned as he sensed my approach. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence between us was thick, filled with unspoken words and undeniable tension. The only sound was the ocean's steady rhythm, a gentle but powerful reminder of nature's pull, untamed, irresistible. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. "I knew you'd come." I looked down, my heart racing. "I shouldn't have." "But you did," he replied, stepping closer, his presence filling the space between us. I felt his hand gently brush against mine, and though I knew I should pull away, I found myself rooted in place, every nerve ending alive with anticipation. He lifted his hand slowly, tracing the line of my jaw, his fingers warm against my skin. My breath caught in my throat, my resolve melting as his touch stirred something deep within me. "Margot," he murmured, his voice soft and filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I can't stop thinking about you. I know this is complicated, but I need you to know how I feel." I closed my eyes, struggling with the internal conflict raging inside me. But as he leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from mine, I felt myself surrender. I knew this was dangerous, that it could destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. But in that moment, with his warmth so close, I couldn't bring myself to care. Our lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, one that quickly deepened as years of unspoken longing, tension, and desire finally found release. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, and I melted into him, letting go of the boundaries that had kept us apart. The world around us faded, leaving only the feeling of his hands, his lips, the warmth of his embrace. We sank down onto the soft sand, our fingers entwined, our bodies pressed close. Every touch, every whisper felt like a promise, an understanding that we were crossing a line we could never uncross. But neither of us hesitated. In that moment, we were just two souls free from titles, obligations, and the weight of expectation. The night stretched on, each moment more intense than the last. As dawn began to break, casting a soft pink light over the water, we lay side by side, catching our breath. I looked over at him, and in his eyes, I saw the same mixture of contentment and uncertainty that I felt. We had crossed the line irrevocably. There was no going back now. And though I knew the morning would bring consequences, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single moment of the night we'd just shared. A week after that unforgettable night on the beach, I convinced myself that I could keep a safe distance from Leo. But when he invited me on a walk through the island's lush jungle to visit a hidden waterfall, I found myself unable to refuse. It was supposed to be a harmless activity, just two people enjoying nature. But something told me this wouldn't be that simple. Leo led the way, guiding us through narrow, winding trails under the thick canopy of tropical trees. When we reached the waterfall, the scene took my breath away. A powerful stream cascaded into a crystal-clear pool, sparkling under patches of sunlight that peeked through the treetops. Leo turned to me, his eyes reflecting the vibrant green surroundings and a glint of something far more intense. He reached out, his hand gently taking mine, and pulled me closer, as if afraid I'd disappear. I couldn't resist him. In the wild quiet of this secluded place, I felt myself once again surrendering to him. We stood there, close under the shade of the trees, his warm breath brushing against my skin as he leaned in. This time, when he kissed me, it wasn't hesitant. It was filled with all the passion and intensity we'd held back for so long. His hands held me, pulling me into him as if he'd never let go. I let myself be lost in him, in that moment, feeling the cool mist of the waterfall and the warmth of his touch. Not long after, Leo sent me another invitation, this time asking me to meet him on a rocky cliffside on the far end of the island, a place far from the resort's guests and staff. When I arrived, he was waiting with a small lantern casting a warm, gentle glow in the darkness. The starry night stretched endlessly above us, and the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks created a hypnotic rhythm. He motioned for me to sit beside him, and as I did, he reached over and let his hand rest on my shoulder. The warmth from his hand spread through me, anchoring me to the moment, making me want to freeze time. We sat in silence, listening to the sea, feeling the energy between us, raw and unrestrained. After a while, I turned to him, and when our eyes met, I knew we didn't need words. We kissed again, our passion intensifying in the darkness. With each touch, each whispered word, we drew closer, until the cliffside itself felt like a sacred space only meant for us. The night was cold, and the rock was rough beneath us, but it all felt thrillingly real, heightening the fire between us. We held each other, two souls intertwined, bound by an attraction that defied any limits. Underneath that vast star-filled sky, I felt as if nothing else in the world mattered. The rainy season had arrived on the island, bringing with it long, cool nights and the rhythmic sound of raindrops. One evening, Leo invited me to a small wooden cabin nestled high on a hill overlooking the island. He had set up a simple dinner with candles flickering in the warm, dim light, casting soft shadows around the cozy space. Outside, the wind and rain played against the cabin walls, sealing us inside a private world of our own. After dinner, we settled onto an old, worn sofa by the window, watching the rain fall in steady sheets. I leaned into him, letting his warmth envelop me, feeling safe and sheltered from the world. He held me gently, running his fingers through my hair in a tender, calming rhythm. The quiet, intimate space made me feel as though we were the only two people on Earth. Without a word, he tilted my chin up and kissed my forehead, a gesture so gentle and reassuring that I felt my heart swell. Under the flickering candlelight and the sound of rain, Leo and I crossed our final boundary. We let ourselves fully give in to the moment, losing ourselves in each other's embrace. Nothing felt forced or rushed. Everything was natural, a connection that felt destined to happen. That night, we let go of any pretense or worry. Wrapped in his arms in the quiet cabin, I felt as if I'd rediscovered a part of myself I had long forgotten. A part that longed for closeness, for warmth, for love. Time passed in my happiness and anxiety. Then the inevitable happened. One evening, Henry, Leo's father and my husband, returned unexpectedly to the island. "Margot, we need to talk," he said, his voice serious. My heart sank as he led me to a quiet room. I knew deep down that he had found out. He didn't accuse me directly, but his questions, his eyes, told me he suspected something. "Margot, I believe you," he said finally, his voice full of sadness, "but I can't ignore what I've heard. Is there something going on between you and Leo?" I opened my mouth to deny it, to protect myself and everything I had built. But the weight of the truth was too much. In that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the truth would find a way to rise up. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But now it's over." Henry looked at me, his eyes both angry and heartbroken. He left the room without another word, and I was left alone, facing the ruins of the world I had carefully created. Leo left Delora soon after, and I haven't seen him since. The resort continues, guests still come, but the island feels empty in a way it never has before. I tell myself I did the right thing, that I protected everything I worked so hard for. But late at night, when the island is quiet, I can still feel the ghost of that night on the beach, the memory of his touch. Sometimes love isn't about happy endings. It's about the moments we carry with us, the choices that shape us, and the memories that linger long after everyone is gone. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the strongest love is the love that leaves us, the love that we have to let go of. Do you believe Margot made the right choice? Or should she have followed her heart despite the risks? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful stories about love, passion, and the choices that define us.